I'd be interested, you've spoken about the people impact gap, with business leaders on one side of that chasm and HR on the other. Can you explain why that gap exists and what companies can do, what people analytics leaders, what HR professionals can do to close that gap?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the gap exists for two reasons. One is very few business leaders are really trained in the aspects of human performance that make a difference in their world. So you're often promoted as a manager because you are capable of managing the task components. You may or may not have gifts in terms of activating people. And yet the amount of revenue we all generate from knowledge is really, really high. And so when you rely on knowledge and you rely on discretion and you rely on an individual to give of their best, it becomes less about, did you get A done? And it becomes more about like, how do I help you, be the best at this task? So there's actually been a shift in what it means to lead people and manage people. It's been subtle. It's been over time. It kind of became the massive go home and work experiment basically brought that into bright relief because all these managers who managed by walking around in the past couldn't do it. So I think there's this whole notion of like managerial capability became really key. And so the gap existed because people weren't thinking that way. They were like, well, I've got my stuff done. I've got my people. We're fine. We'll just carry on. And so, the realization of the gap, the what's possible, I feel like I'm fighting with one hand tied behind my back because I don't have the data. So that's kind of what's creating the energy on one side of the gap. The other side of this gap, and I've talked about this a lot, it's like, for the longest time, the focus of HR investment has been around efficiency. And I'm slightly frustrated that we're seeing it again in that we replaced the HRIS as that wave's happened. That took form filling to a cloud-based digital transactional system. It got you efficiency gains, though again the evidence for that return to the business is poor. Now we're in the next wave, like, well, let's set some technology on top of the technology we had, which was supposed to make us more efficient. It's going to make that more efficient. And it's like there's a point where efficiency becomes a diminishing return. The investment for reward is just not there. So I think that on the people side, often the investments have been, initially correctly focused on efficiency. And I talked to a few consultants who were part of that wave, and they're like, yeah, it was the right thing to do, but it's not the right thing to do anymore. So we created the conditions in HR of digitizing all the events, all the transactions, all this massive amount of insight about people. We haven't made the investment to take that to the business. Sometimes we haven't seen it as our job. Sometimes we don't know it's possible. So I think there's been growth and development in each of these functional aspects of the business that were done in silos, and kind of necessarily. But now we're at a phase in business where we have to go back and rejoin the silos. And the way I've seen it done is, and you've probably seen the same, if you can, you hire somebody who's got that business acumen and analytic orientation to walk across the chasm and say, how can I help? What business problem are you facing? How do people, make or break your goals this year? If you had data that would inform this strategy, what would it look like? How would you use it? How can I get that to you? And so you engage with the stakeholders on the business side and again, not in a blanket, like, here's the dashboard everybody needs. That's a bit of an HR out push. There's a place for that. But I think we start to really close this gap when, again, I think you and I know exactly the same story about that distribution business, where you walk into the business and you say, like, what are you facing in this uncertain times? If I can find some data to help you make a decision about that, would you, pay attention to it? Would you welcome it? And that revolutionized the trajectory for that team. We have myriad of those stories, and so it starts with an individual. It starts with an intent from the CHRO. we have seen it start with willingness from the business side. There's always friendlies on the business side who increasingly get, like, people make or break my results. And so I think you start to close the chasm through stakeholder engagement, investment in the capability, and just really long and the short of it is prioritizing it. Not looking at a smooth way to book vacation as a success.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.